During his campaign, Donald Trump said a lot of things that he wanted to do if he returned to the White House. He said he wanted militarized mass deportations. He said he wanted to defund schools that require vaccines for its students. He said he wanted to shut down the Department of Education. He threatened to prosecute and punish his perceived enemies. And he said that he would be a dictator on day one. We all remember that. And in just 2 short months, we will see how these promises shake out when Donald Trump is inaugurated as the 47th president. I want to be clear, our institutions and democracy are about to be pushed in unprecedented ways. But Donald Trump is not going to be anointed king. He's going to be inaugurated president. And while that comes with a frightening amount of power, the power is not limitless. Built into our government and society are some guardrails and checks on Donald Trump's impulses. Yes, Donald Trump and his allies have and will continue to undermine and attempt to remove those guardrails. But they are not all gone. It will take work and diligence, but there will still be some limits to what Donald Trump can and cannot do. And this is a question I'm getting a lot. So I wanted to bring on my friend, who is the former acting U.S. Solicitor General. You all know him well, Neal Katyal, to help answer some of these questions. Neal, it's great to see you. Thank you for taking the time. I just wanted to start. I mean, one of the things that Trump has repeated multiple times since Tuesday is his commitment to mass deportations of migrants. And I know that is on the minds of a lot of people. He can't do it alone, but help us understand how you think he's going to try and do it and what in the system might stand in his way of doing it.
Yeah, let me talk about the guardrails generally first and then get to mass deportation. So the bottom line is I think the courts can do something to protect the guardrails, but not always. And yes, it's a 6-3 Republican appointed majority on the U.S. Supreme Court. But that's basically been true, Jen, our entire lifetime. Since the early 1970s, it's always been a Republican majority of the Supreme Court. And that Republican majority has at times stopped some of Trump's excesses. So you think about, the census case in which they ruled against him, or the 62 times in the 2020 election and the like. There have been a bunch of times in which Trump has lost. There are two big differences going forward in 2025. One is that the president looks like he's going to have the House and Senate also with him. And many of the times when the courts stop the president, and particularly President Trump, it's because he's doing something by unilateral executive action. And Justice Jackson, other justices have said when it's the president plus Congress together with legislation, then they defer to that more. And the second is, of course, the personnel of the court has changed even since 2020. You've got Justice Barrett replacing Justice Ginsburg, to take one notable example. So how does that play out in mass immigration? Well, I mean, Trump's plan is he says he's going to prioritize criminals for deportation. Honestly, if only he led by example, that'd be one thing. But what he's basing this on is this idea that the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 permits it. I do think there the courts are going to protect us and protect the individuals. It requires a invasion or predatory incursion, which is very hard to say is going on. So, that's an example of where I think the courts can and will do something.
Let me ask you about two specific things there's been reporting on. One is that there's been reporting that he may try to deport people who President Biden has already allowed to legally enter the United States. Can he do that? I mean, where would the courts come down on something like that to the degree you could predict?
Yeah, it's very hard for that to happen because the Supreme Court has said such individuals are entitled to due process before they are deported. Now, that just means hearings, and it could be in those hearings those people will ultimately be deported. But it does require a lot more process. It can't just be the president say so unilaterally. The other thing is there's a practical problem. It would need Congress to fund such a thing. You couldn't do it, I think, by executive action alone. Now, he may have that, but that may require 60 votes in the Senate because of the filibuster rule. So one really important question going forward is when the Democrats controlled the Senate, they did not blow up the filibuster. If that holds and the Republicans don't blow up the filibuster and require 60 votes to fund deportations or to have a national abortion ban or whatever else Trump wants to do, that is a very serious guardrail that can protect us.
That's going to have a huge impact on the abortion question. I just wanted to ask you one more immigration one, and hopefully we can keep doing this because this is something people are trying to understand, which is that he also promised to sign an executive order on day one to end birthright citizenship in the United States. Can he do that via executive order?
No. Last I checked, the president can't override the Constitution. The 14th Amendment is as clear as day that there is no way he can do that. If he tries that, he will lose in court every day of the week.
Neil Katyal, there's so many more questions I have. I know people have. I hope we can do this regularly as we try to understand what the guardrails are, even as people are trying to cope with this moment. So thank you so much for joining me. Coming up, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris prepared to restore a tradition that Donald Trump tried to destroy, the peaceful transfer of power. But first, very few politicians talk about the economy as effectively as Congresswoman Katie Porter. We'll talk about where Democratic messaging might have gone wrong and what to expect from the second Trump term coming up next. You made a name for yourself taking out your whiteboard. Don't suppose you have a whiteboard with you at committee hearings. And Donald Trump is planning a lot. I mean, this is now what we got to look at and look at the impact of. Across the board tariffs, tax cuts for the wealthy. Explain to us in only the way you can what's coming.
Yep. So I do have a whiteboard this morning. It's always a little terrifying to do this on live TV, I will confess. But let me say a few things Donald Trump has said he's going to do. So he made very clear that one of the things he wanted to do was put tariffs on goods coming into the United States. What does this lead to? It leads to higher costs for consumers. Just straight up. When companies pay more for things, the inputs into their goods, they pass that along to us straight away. The other thing he said he's going to do is he said he's going to weaken antitrust. Now, the whole point of antitrust, which was something I think the Biden administration did really, really well, is to create competition. And guess what competition does? It lowers prices. So if you weaken antitrust, you're going to see higher costs for consumers. The third thing is he said he's going to deport workers. Well, guess what the problem with that is? If you deport workers or you reduce immigration in areas where we need workers, then labor costs go up for businesses. And look, what do businesses do? They pass that along to consumers with regard to higher costs. So I think there's a real disconnect between how voters perceived Donald Trump's economic plan and what we have in store for us, which is, I fear, higher costs on virtually everything.
That whiteboard, we're going to repost that.